Our featured guest tonight is an incredible musician who's been lauded by some of the greatest guitarists in the business as potentially the best newest guitarist in the world. His debut album, The Journey, has announced him on the international stage, and he arrives in North America later this month for a coast-to-coast tour. Here to chat about his life, career, and brand new tour is none other than Matteo Mancuso. Matteo, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Too kind.
So before we talk about music, I'd like to talk a little bit about your background. I'm an Italian who's never been to Sicily, but all the Sicilians I've ever known over the years are very proud of their heritage and unique culture of the island. You grew up, I guess, just outside of Palermo, as I recall. What are some of your favorite things about growing up in Sicily?
Well, growing up in Sicily, first of all, it's a beautiful place. So I began to be affectionate to a lot of sea places in Sicily because there are tons of them. Palermo is a very beautiful city, and I consider myself extremely lucky because when I studied there, then I did the conservatory in Palermo, I did the high school, the musical high school in Palermo, and I really never had a problem. All the teachers were great. The musical environment is amazing, I think. There are not tons of musicians because Palermo is not a really big city. So you cannot compare Palermo to, I don't know, LA or New York, of course. But it's a nice place. And of course, yes, it's pros and cons, like every city in the world. But I consider myself very lucky because I was born in a very musical environment. And one of the advantages I had from the start was that I grew up in a very musical family. Like my father is also a guitar player. I have one older sister and one older brother. I'm the youngest in the family. And my older brother plays classical guitar. And my sister, she writes songs all the time. She writes like, I don't know, 30 songs every month. She's way more prolific than me. But yeah, I grew up in a very good musical environment, let's say. And I realized that after a while, because back when I was a little kid, I thought that every family was interested in music in some way. And then when I got to middle school, everyone was talking about football, like Inter Milan, Juventus, and I didn't even know what Juventus was. Like I wasn't, I never was a football guy, let's say. And a lot of people in Italy, you know it better than me, are way more interested in football than music, let's say. And that was my first shock, let's say, when I got to the middle school, because I just thought it was a normal family, Then I realized it was not that common to have all this music available from the start. That's why I consider myself very lucky because of that. I had a very good musical diet from the start. And my father still has a lot of vinyls and CDs. Sometimes we just listen music on the car or on the radio, And it was a big part of my musical development.
And yeah, you'd mentioned your dad was a well-known classical guitarist himself. Do you have a favorite memory of him and his guitar playing growing up?
Well, he was not only a classical player, it was more let's say, a session player, especially in Italy, and a producer as well. He studied classical guitar when he was younger, but back when he was young like me, or even younger than me now, at the conservatory, there was not classical guitar. So he had to choose flute, if I remember correctly, and then he studied classical guitar on his own, let's say. And he's a special player. I consider him still one of the best players I know. And I don't say this because it's my father. I mean, I listen to him every day, and every day he has something new to show me. And it's almost magical, And so I think he was more active during the 80s and the 90s. And then on the first 2000s, he stayed more at home, of course, to stay with the kids, stay with me and my family. Kind of was my first listening guide, let's say. I began to know all the jazz guys thanks to him, for example. Back when I started, I was really into rock and roll, like AC/DC, Led Zeppelin, and Deep Purple, this kind of guys. But when I was around 14, it came to me and it said like we need to go back in time and listen to some of the players that came before. So thanks to him, I have like good knowledge of a lot of jazz players and even non-jazz, but a lot of musicians in general that I began to know thanks to my father, let's say. Yeah, so it was a huge help, especially at the start.
Now, did you gravitate to the guitar immediately, or did other instruments or perhaps hobbies ever try to pull you in, or were you locked in on the guitar from the very beginning?
Well, I was curious about music in general, but I just thought the guitar was the sexiest instrument, let's say. It was the coolest one. And also because I always saw my father playing at home. So, I mean, I was listening to guitar all the time, even before I started playing. So I just thought it was cool to play, especially electric guitar. Like I wasn't really into classical back when I started. In fact, many people confuse this, but I actually started with the electric guitar rather than classical. And then I started studying classical guitar back when I was 14 years old in high school, but I wasn't really into it. I was a really bad student for classical guitar. And that's why I still consider myself primarily an electric player because I really like to play with the rhythm section. I really like to play with a band. And you can do this better with the electric guitar. And simply because classical guitar is not an orchestra instrument. So you pretty much play alone most of the time, just with your score. And of course, it's beautiful. There are a lot of beautiful solo pieces for classical guitar, but I was missing the interaction between other musicians. So that's why I decided to stick with the electric more. And I still play classical guitar a lot, but it's not really the thing I prefer. Like if I play too much classical, I start to miss the sound of the electric guitar, let's say. So that's why I tend to play more electric.
Being from Sicily, and I may be a little ignorant on this, I'm curious though, is there any specific sound or type of music unique to Sicily which may have influenced a direction that you went in, or does it not have its own separate musical culture? You know, like there's certain cities, like if you're from Seattle in the States, you may have a certain sound. If you're from Boston, you may have a certain sound. In other words, based on the cultural music of that particular city or area, it may have influence. Is there any, does Sicily have any specific type of musical influence in and of itself? Or or is it just you developing your own style, your own way through your family upbringing and whatnot?
Well, I have to be honest, it was mostly American music. Like, and not because I'm not a big fan of Italian music, of course, but I tend to grow up with a lot of internet. Like my cultural and let's say also technical development was sped up thanks to YouTube. And I'm completely honest on this. I was searching for a lot of different players. I was searching for different music, and that was only thanks to internet. I will never be able to play like the way I play if I was only, let's say, influenced by local musicians. And not necessarily because the local musicians are not good in Sicily, but because there are few of them. Like there's less number of it. And I'm sure that Sicily and Italy, in a way, influenced me in the way I play. But I'm not able to pick the influence, you know. I'm sure it has an influence. Like because I'm Italian, I'm Sicilian, I love the place. I stay, I love my home. And it sure has some, let's say, musical influence on me. But if I have to say some names, for example, 90% of the names I would say as an influence are American people and Europeans in general.
Yeah, it makes sense. As you got older, I presume your father saw you progressing in your guitar craft. What is the first memory you have of maybe where your dad says, you know, or finally lets on that your skills might be special?
To be honest, I immediately realized that when I was starting, both because I was having friends that they started guitar with me, like I was having, and still I have a lot of friends that have my same passion. And I realized that there were some things that were easier for me and harder for them. Like I was learning things maybe in 2 hours, and they were learning the same thing in 1 week. So I asked myself, okay, this thing feels easy. Uh, so I want to concentrate on that, not necessarily because it feels easy, but also because I enjoy it, first of all. And then I started, like before entering the YouTube era, let's say, like before discovering all the things that internet has to provide, I was comparing myself with my friends. So I thought, oh, I'm extremely good because they're not able to do that. And I am, so I'm special. And then you go on YouTube and you search for like Chinese guitar player, and they humble you down very immediately, you know? So I immediately realized that I was not the only one that has that kind of predisposition with music and guitar in general. So I started to study more thanks to internet, actually. Like I was realizing, okay, the level in the world, the guitar level and physical level is this one right now. There are a lot of guitar players that are incredibly good. And in order to get on that level, you really need to have both talent and study. If you have only one of these, it's not gonna work. If you have only talent and you don't put the hours and the study on it, it's not gonna work.